Hi students, we are back and it's time to trim the cup that we threw earlier. We have a nice cup. It's now leather hard and it has quite a bit of clay at the base and it needs to be trimmed and refined so it has a nice elegant foot. All of your ceramics should be trimmed and they should have a raised foot ring that you then trim into your form to take the weight out of the bottom and to lift up and elevate the form. So to do that, we are going to start by marking where our foot ring should go. I usually teach this by putting a needle mark right into the cup and I have it stick out the bottom, and that tells me right there where the floor raises up into the wall of the cup. That is the typical place where you are going to put any foot ring, and it's a good standard for measuring where foot rings should go. You can see here in my diagram that this form, this cup form, has an illustration of where the foot ring will go on the cup. So you can see that the foot ring generally always lines up where the floor curves up into the wall. While this is not always true as far as form goes, it's a pretty accurate estimation and it'll help you determine where your foot ring should be placed in relationship to a form. If I flip this cup over, you'll see that the foot and its placement makes sense. So when I turn it, you can also see that the foot ring is just below where the foot curves up into the wall. So I'm going to take this cup and get it centered on the wheel. To do this, I put down a light film of water and I place my cup right in the middle of the concentric rings on my wheel head. This does not guarantee centered, but it does help us get close to where we need to be to center our clay. I'm going to take my needle tool here and have this ready to go. So to center my clay, I get my wheel spinning, not terribly fast, but fast enough, about 20 miles an hour, that when I hold my needle tool absolutely perpendicular to my form, it makes a mark and I can see that my cup is out of alignment. A lot like a needle plays a record, your cup needs to be in alignment in order to create a foot ring that is on center. When I discover that this is the line that my needle made, this part is sticking out far enough to come around and touch my tool, it tells me that this side, the side facing towards me, needs to push out a little farther to come out and meet my tool and be in alignment. So I push my clay, and this is important, a fraction of an inch. A fraction of an inch. That's like a 1/16 of an inch, sometimes an 1/8 of an inch. You don't want to push it more than that. You want to push your clay in little increments until you can get it centered. I'm going to erase that mark with my sponge and create a new mark. So I can see that my line is getting just a little bit longer. So that's telling me that I'm starting to center up. So I'm going to figure out where the center of that line is, and I'm going to push the part that does not have the line towards the outer edge of the wheel so it can come into alignment. I move it a fraction of an inch. Now I'm going to take my tool and my line is going all the way around. That tells me that my clay is centered and then I'm ready to trim. So I use lugs of medium soft clay. I don't use the really wet clay out of the bag. I take out a little piece of clay, chunk it up into pieces that are about half the size of my thumb, and then I let them sit out for a couple of minutes before I start trimming. This is because you need to fasten your clay down to the wheel, and we use lugs to do it. When you put your lugs on, you want to press your clay into the wheel head. If you press into your pot, you're gonna crack your rim. So when you fasten your clay down, you can press the clay up against your pot, but mostly you're just fastening the clay to the wheel head. 3 lugs is usually plenty. I see a lot of students just put huge wads of clay around their pots, and I think that that's a little excessive, and plus it can mess up the rim. Okay, so this cup's a little dry, so I'm just gonna run some water over it. It's been 100 degrees in Los Angeles the past 2 days, so my clay has been drying out rather quickly. This is your trim tool. Okay, you want to use the flat end of your trim tool to start. And when we start trimming, you want to hold your tool like an X-Acto blade. You don't hold it like a pencil because your tool will just bounce around as you try and trim. You hold it like an X-Acto close to the edge of the tool so you maintain a lot of control. When you start to trim, you can manipulate your tool until you find the sweet spot of the blade and your clay starts cutting. When I am trimming, I usually try and touch my pot and anchor a finger over to my tool. That's not always possible when you're beginning and learning how to trim. It's pretty scary and uncomfortable. So a lot of students like to hold on to their tools using 2 hands, holding their tool and moving over their form. Whenever possible, I do want you to try and anchor your hand to your clay, to the pot that you're trimming. It kind of helps you determine how your pot feels. And also, if it lifts off and starts to fly off your wheel, you can catch it. So I am going to start to articulate this form and carve in a raised foot ring. I do this by moving my tool to the side and cutting in straight on like that. But I also spend a lot of time rolling my tool over the form. I definitely want to flow with the tool. I don't want to just hold the tool in one spot and drill lines down the side. So you have to be a little bit of a dancer over the surface of your form. Once you establish your foot ring, and you can always check by the piercing that you put into it, and that's right there, then you can start to trim out the interior. Students, this is always the spot where most beginning students cut a hole into their clay. Just remember that this part of your cup is by far the thinnest, and you have to be a little gingerly around the interior of your foot ring. So it's very thick right here, but also thinner here. So you have to be a little careful. Just gonna roll my tool over the foot, and just like that, my foot ring is done. I'm gonna remove my clay lugs. I'm gonna pop my cup off, And you can see here that I have a really nice foot ring. Excuse me. It's well trimmed, it's centered, it's even, and it makes the form of the cup look good. Now let's put a handle on your cup. Making a handle for your cup can be pretty straightforward, and you'll see from your module on Canvas that I have a lot to say about cup handles. But to create a simple handle is fairly straightforward. What I have here is a hunk of clay. It's about the size of my palm, okay? It's a little bit bigger than my thumb, and I roll out this hunk of clay on top of a board into a nice, thin, tapered carrot shape. So your coil of clay here should taper down almost like a carrot. You want to pat your handle kind of round and oval shaped, a flattened oval. And then you're going to take your sponge and you're going to take a damp sponge and you're going to stroke over the surface of the handle. So you get it prepared, but to make it look more finished and more polished, we take our sponge and we stroke over the handle, basically pulling it along the board and stretching it almost like a piece of taffy, so it looks a lot more elegant and more fluid. And I keep moving it from spot to spot so it doesn't stick down to the table. And this is the way that I'm going to get a very fluid and elegant handle. I'm going to flip this over and do the back side and rub out any little markings or creases. Flip it back over, smooth it out. And now I'm ready to take this handle and bend it into a beautiful soft curve. I don't stick this to my cup immediately. I usually set it down and let it stiffen up a little bit before I attach it to the form. Before I do that, I cut away the extra clay so that it's nicely hooked. I have one here that I made earlier for you to see. And this is a beautiful pulled handle the same way. It's ribbon-like, flat, and very fluid looking. So to attach this to my cup, I'm just gonna cut away that little bit of extra clay there. I'm gonna score really deeply. And you know all this, we've talked about this a lot. So you want to have dark black shadows in your cup. Now, to determine where you're going to place your handle on your mug, it's really important. If you place it too low, it'll feel really awkward and look really awkward when you drink. The opposite of that is you place it too high, you'll be punching yourself in the face whenever you lift the cup up to your mouth. I find that placing your handle about an inch below the rim is ideal. So I score really well where I'm going to attach, and I kind of eyeball where I think that the bottom of the handle is going to go. I'm going to score the bottom of my handle here. And then I have all this great slurry from when I was throwing before. So I'm going to dip my handle in that. Yum, lots of good slurry. And now I'm going to take my cup and press the handle right at the top into the scored parts, joining them together. And it's really important that you press really firmly, that you wiggle and jiggle and attach this handle down and make sure that it's on there. There's nothing worse than having your handle crack off of your nice cup. I'm gonna also make sure that my handle is on really straight. Oftentimes I'll lean it to the side if I'm talking on the phone while I'm working in studio and I'm not paying attention. And now I'm gonna press this clay down right where I scored. And lastly, you wanna look your cup over. You wanna make sure that you remove all the clay boogers, any goop of slip, because that will just fire and harden and be sharp under your fingertips. Any little clay bit that you see or little clay pebble, you wanna get that out of there, because that will fire sharp and it will bother you every time you drink out of your cup. You also want to go around the rim of your cup, sponge, make sure that it's all nice and clean and that the craftsmanship is really great. Look at this beautiful little handle on this cup. This is a perfect size. My fingers aren't too far away from the cup to make it awkward when I go to pour this or drink out of it, and they're not so close to the cup that I'll burn my fingers when I have a hot cup of coffee or tea. So this space right in between is great. Okay, students, making handles on mugs. Have a great day.